It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I'm really excited to talk with my guest today. Joining me is Scott Miller, founder and CEO of RampedUp.io. It's a Salesforce plugin that's designed to help you decrease ramp-up time of new employees, improve close rates, tell better stories. Scott, welcome to Accelerate.
Thank you, Andy. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So take a minute, introduce yourself.
Thanks.
Tell us how you got your start in sales, for instance.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I am a 20-year veteran in sales, and like a lot of us, I graduated with a political science degree, and there wasn't any jobs. There were no jobs at the political science factory.
I was a history major, so I feel your pain.
You know exactly what that's like, right? So I got into sales about 20 years ago and started in the trenches, inside sales rep, and moved my way up to as a enterprise seller to lead sales teams at some Fortune 1000 and even up to Fortune 100 companies. And I got the startup bug by working at a local startup here in Atlanta called Social 123. And you really realize that there's not a big difference between what these startups are doing and what you're doing. Carrying a bag and trying to work for these larger companies, except they just had the will and the energy and the support to go out and do it. All right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know you've told me that's a similar experience to you as well, and so that's the reason why I went out and started Ramped Up, because I saw a need and I thought I could address it, and that's where we are here.
All right, what was that need?
Well, it really was getting institutional information to new sellers. I was a sales manager at this Fortune 1000 HR benefits company, and I experienced the 80-20 rule like everybody else experienced the 80-20 rule, meaning that 20% of my reps were bringing in 80% of the business. And I was trying to swim upstream to try to figure out, what are these guys doing correctly? How can I get their best practices, their tips, their tactics, their habits, into the minds of new sellers, so I could at least put a little dent into that 80-20 rule. And I came up with this little concept, this best practice sales cycle concept that tended to work. Right, it helped shorten ramp up times, and so that was one example.
And what was the best practice sales cycle?
Well, the best practice sales cycle it sounds very simple in concept, but it takes the stages of your particular sales process and it defines them, and then it tells the tactics and exposes the tactics that your best practitioners, are doing to matriculate that opportunity down the steps of the sales process to close, and it links that information out, right? So if you need to. If they're doing something in particular that might make it a little bit more unique, it takes some of this outlier behavior that we think that A players provide that is a little bit mysterious, and it really shows how this information is done, so it can be a standard practice for new sellers.
So, and the theory being that, and this is really interesting, is that because it sort of runs against what I think a lot of people's perception is that. Somehow the A players are inherently different, and what you're really saying is that really at some level, what they really did is at some point they ran across somebody else that showed them how to do things well, that they integrated into how they're selling. And if we could just get other people to see that and be exposed to it, that it's going to start elevating some of those B and C players.
Yeah, I mean, that's the theory, in many instances, what separates an A player from a B player can be, talent or territory, or their Rolodex in some instances, right? To prove I've been in sales for 20 years, I'm gonna use the term Rolodex.
Yeah, good.
And
most people hear that, they think it's a watch.
That's right. But in a lot of instances, right, they just have had the exposure to other people that have been successful. That generally is the case more times than not. And so what we want to do is share that exposure. And so that was an example that I learned, when I was working at a Fortune 1000 company. Another example that I learned that, was very, very challenging for me as trying to get new reps up to speed was, giving them access to relevant use cases. And so, a lot of times our We had access to, a couple of use cases, what we had on the website underneath the My Customers tab and, customer success stories, which is very helpful. I'm not trying to belittle that, but usually it's not definitive enough, right? It's not specific enough for a case-by-case basis. And what I would do as a sales leader is that I would resort back to the win story emails that came out either from corporate or myself or from another sales leader talking about how we were able to beat this big customer under this big install in this unique industry with these new products we're going to market. And that was the knowledge base, was Outlook in some instances, right?
Well, yeah, and often companies, when they take those emails that are published internally, which have the good scoop in it, and then when they sanitize it to make a case study out of it, they put it on their website that really, for fear, I think, of exposing secrets, they put something out that's kind of vanilla that doesn't help either the sales rep or the customer.
And that's a great point, and it has to reach the threshold of being, public/customer facing. When in fact, that's not what every seller needs, right? You don't need a customer-facing document. You need the internal information. These are employees that would have received these emails anyway if they were working at your company, right? So the next step that we created inside of Ramped Up was to, institutionalize that process of creating a win story, put it into a central repository, use it as a mechanism for recognition and promotion, of A players and best practices in terms of the same way that a brag email would do today. But keep it in a repository so the next time that you go to market or you need a knowledge base for sales onboarding, a new seller, use these win stories in a repository, so that you understand, who's buying your stuff specifically to provide some content to context, right? Who's buying your stuff, with these win stories, what buyers are buying your stuff using these win stories, what products are being sold using these win stories, and what industries are you impacting using win stories. And so that was the next iteration of the product.
Yeah, very interesting. And in there, I think, I read an article, I believe that you had written about 4 tips to improve first call conversations, which I thought was interesting because I presume you incorporate a lot of what you spoke about in your product, and really geared to helping people sell with confidence, right? Because to me, one of the big obstacles for salespeople is they don't consider themselves being a peer of the people they're selling to.
Yeah.
And that's an issue.
Well, it is, and I think one of the things, we train our sellers is that you're not a peer of these folks, right? I mean, so you're starting off with that obvious assessment, right? But you want to be as close as you can. And so that the concept of the picked profile or peer-to-peer selling really says that, it backs up some research that we've seen from the SAP stating that 90% of sellers said that a relevant use case will influence their decision. And so that really doubles down on the concept of having a repository of win stories, right? So
that's 90% of sellers or 90% of buyers?
I'm sorry, buyers. I apologize. 90% of buyers. I'm sure 90% of sellers would agree.
Yeah, they probably would too, right?
Yeah. So that's what we want to give, especially a new seller, right, that comes in with, just the information that they received from, their sales training or their sales training manager, is that we want to empower them with these relevant win stories so that they can start to influence their own decisions early in the process. And so, what we've done is that we've narrowed it down really to those 4 key industries, right? As I mentioned before, we want to provide relevant use cases and provide, information more specifically around a buyer and a buyer persona. And that's one of the dirty little secrets that marketing has over sales. And I'm glad to see that, sales is getting their hands on these concepts of buyer personas. And it's so impactful to make, messaging that can really move the needle in marketing. Let's share that information with sales in terms of buyer personas and then provide context to those buyer personas and win stories. Product and product marketing, which of course is a staple of all new hire training, but also make that in relation to win stories. Industry, the big broad industry overviews, but let's keep that specific to the industries that we can impact and with win stories as well. And then lastly, it's competition.
Right.
So I'll go ahead and let you comment on that.
Well, I was going to say on the industry thing is that one of the things you brought in the article I thought was relevant and that oftentimes overlooked is, and I just had a conversation with somebody else I was interviewing earlier today about this, is that this idea of sort of specialist versus generalist in sales, and you talk about the need for sales reps really to have insights about the customer, not just on the micro level in terms of, hey, this is a problem I'm trying to solve, but also the macro trends that affect their business.
Yeah.
They need to have the whole picture if they're talking to them, so they understand the context of why they're trying to solve this particular problem.
I think that's what buyers want to hear, right? I mean, there are, more and more sales reps and even more business development reps to support sales reps. And so, it's a pretty played out concept to talk about how busy our buyers are. But we know that, we know how busy they are. And if, your megaphone has to either be louder or, your arrow has to be sharper, in terms of, getting that conversation and then capturing the imagination of that buyer, so that they will embark on an evaluation of your solution. And so those are really, those critical 3 minutes. We talk about it used to be the 3-foot rule, right? That you have to be within 3 feet of your buyer, meaning that you have to get out and get in their office.
Right.
It's really, you can add on to that. It has to be really the 3-minute rule. They're going to give you about 3 minutes before, they're either going to tune you out or they're going to allow you in, right? And so if you're not really geared up in terms of some of that industry expertise and some of that company and title expertise and buyer expertise and specific to things that we know that'll move the needle for them, which are relevant use cases and win stories, you're really putting yourself at a disadvantage.
Well, yeah. And if you're exercising the 3-foot rule, having the louder megaphone's not really an appropriate way to go. The sharper arrow really is much more effective at close range like that.
Yeah.
The other thing that you brought up with that, when we, again, just to finish that part, huge credibility gain for sales rep if they can do that is how do you ingrain that? You guys talk about onboarding as part of your product and your system. Is how do you ingrain this need to have this knowledge and maybe even communicate it to your reps to help onboard them, bring up to speed, ramp them up more quickly?
Yeah. So, you think about sort of the context that we've discussed so far. You have these best practices centrally located and linked out. You have this repository of win stories, and now they're associated with knowledge bases. So that is a swath of information, right? And so what you really want to do is put that into bite-sized pieces for a new seller. But the way that what we've understood, and what we've seen that is most effective is that you want to make the onboarding process, embedded inside of CRM, but you also want to make it self-directed. So there is a study out from McKinsey & Company that states that 33% of a new seller's time is wasted because either they're waiting on their supervisor to tell them what to do, and I know that any sales manager that's had a new hire and also had to bring in and carry their number at the same time can sympathize with that number, right? Or they know what to do, they just don't know where to find it, right? So go find the playbook and study what our industry best practices are, right? And so think about that, 33%, right? That's a significant amount of time when you think about, we're investing in these sellers before, they're even providing any value back to us.
Well, just think about it from the deferred revenue standpoint.
Exactly. And so, what we've come up with is this concept of really the self-directed framework. Since we have this institutional knowledge, we want to ensure that, the rep knows exactly what to do and when to do it. And then you bring the frontline sales manager on board, or whomever's responsible for bringing that new seller on board, through the concept of a checklist. And then if you have a date specific on those checks, on that checklist, and if they've passed that date in terms of that due date of that responsibility, then we'll email the individuals that are responsible, like the new hire or the training manager, to see if they're falling behind task. But generally, what you'll find is that 33% can even go as high to 50% because they know exactly what they need to get done, and if they're the right type of person in the right type of environment, they're going to take that upon themselves to do what needs to be done in a much faster time frame.
Okay, perfect. What is the average ramp-up time for a sales rep right now?
Well, it depends, right? I mean, it depends on really how you're going to market, right? We've done our own internal, study that says it's a little over 5.5 months, right? And those are, and when I say that, that's a B2B. Generally, our customers are B2B, and that's generally, some sort of software as a service or service themselves, right?
So is that for an SDR or for an account exec?
It's for an account executive.
Account exec, okay.
But of course, that's a good point. And as you hear more and more, companies that are segmenting the responsibilities, of demand creation to the BDR, the BDR we've seen anywhere from, depending on who you're hiring, you're hiring somebody that's, 16 months out of school or 16 weeks out of school. It depends on who that person is, because there are what we've seen is that there are other pieces of business acumen that they have to acquire, as opposed to, hiring a more experienced BDR. And that ranges anywhere from 1 to 3 months.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I look back at my own job. I was business to business. I was field sales, selling computer stuff, and 16 weeks after graduation. And ramp up time was close to a year almost.
Yeah, well, that's not what's expected today. I mean, I'm sure most people that are listening to this podcast and this radio cast as well will tell you that you from a BDR perspective, if you are spending more than 3 months getting them ramped up, then you're probably not using the most efficient process.
Yeah,
and that's go ahead.
Well, we were full cycle reps, right? So, I mean, from a prospecting standpoint, doing a BDR, I mean, I had about a month to get up to speed.
Yeah, about a month to get up to speed, right?
So, but I was talking about, to the point where I was fully capable and self-sufficient, but selling a fairly complex product line. But you had to get up to speed quickly because, like, my first year of being on board, there were like 3 cut points built in, and if you weren't at the right spot, at the right stage at the right time, you're going to get weeded out.
Well, the secret sauce really in these things that we've been discussing today really comes in the form of ongoing reinforcement of those concepts. And so if you want your seller to be more productive, then you can take advantage of these concepts that we've discussed, but it will just be like any other sales training if it's not reinforced, meaning that they'll probably lose. I mean, Sales Benchmark Index states that a seller will probably retain close to 10% of what they learn in sales training, which means that's a 90% loss if you think about the opposite side of that statistic, right? If
in classroom training, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the ways that we try to tackle that problem is that we have this concept of a battle card, right? So if you are an SDR or if you are an account executive that's on the further end of the sales process, we're actually handling the opportunity itself. One of the things that we want to do is drill down on all that information that we've collected in the terms of win stories, in the terms of best practices for managing your sales process, and in terms of that tribal knowledge specific to the industry, specific to the buyer, specific to the product, specific to the competitor. Take all of that information that we're collecting that we put inside of our system and ramped up and make it specific to that opportunity. And that way, they don't have to go digging for it. They don't have to imagine where that would be inside the system, right? Or imagine if it's applicable for them. We put it inside the opportunity record itself, inside of Salesforce, as an example for CRM. So it's part of the process, right? And then some of those things you talked about in terms of the pick profile. That what is the company themselves? What are some of those triggering events? What are those? How are these, as Jill Conrad says, use the news, right? Well, how are these guys in the news, and how can we sell to them using some of the recent headlines? Social selling techniques, try to find the most applicable contacts that are working at that company, using some of those buyer personas. I think a statistic that CEB has out now that an average B2B sales process has 5.5 decision makers. And usually, the sales rep is talking to one, and that's the one that'll call them back, right? So we want to have a bigger concept of who the decision-making team is. And so that's really what we try to do is in terms of a battle card is boil all this public information that's available out there on the web and all the private information that you have in terms of these win stories and best practices, blend those together just in time for the rep to have it in terms of helping them close. When we talk about improved close rates, that'll help them improve their close rates immensely.
Okay. Well, good. Well, we're going to give people some time or give you some time after a few minutes to tell people how to find out more about Ramped Up IO. Meantime, go to the last segment of the show. I've got some standard questions I pose to all my guests. And the first one is a hypothetical scenario where you, Scott, have just been hired as the new sales VP for a company that's sales have stalled out. They're stuck. Company wants to get unstuck as fast as possible, CEO in particular. got a lot on the line. So what 2 things could you do your first week on the job that could have the biggest impact?
Oh, that's a really good question. Ironically, I am put in those situations, based on what we do, right? And so, the first thing that we look for is there any type of, who are your best practitioners, and are you ensuring that those individuals are A, being recognized, and B, they're being duplicated. So that's really the concept of the best practice sales cycle, right? Let's understand, are we all on the same page in terms of the stages of our sales process and what we define those things to be? Are we all on the same page in terms of what needs to be done to move that sales process from cold to close? And if that is the case, right, do we have the right people? Then I guess that second piece would be, do we have the right people that can execute upon that? I'm a big proponent of Salesforce dashboards, like I'm sure most people that are listening to this are as well. We want to make sure that our KPIs are clear and transparent and achievable, right? But we also have to be very, very conscious of the fact that, that we are in sales and there's an end game, in terms of what we're achieving. And if the people that we have on board, once they've been exposed to best practices and taught how to do it, aren't achieving them, we have to find the people that can.
Okay, great answer. So some rapid fire questions for you. You can give me 1-word answers if you want, or you can elaborate. So the first one is, when you, Scott Miller, are out selling, you personally, what's your most powerful sales attribute?
I think my most powerful sales attribute is that I like to come to my meetings prepared.
Preparation, love it. Who's your sales role model?
My sales role model is a guy named Rick Page, who founded the Complex Sale. I had the privilege of working with him for a couple of years, and he demystified the complex sale for me, and his company did that for a long time as well.
Okay, great. What's one book every salesperson should read?
Well, there's a lot of them right now, I think, but, some of the ones that most impacted me when I was early in my career would probably be spin selling. It really takes the concept of selling the drill in terms of selling the whole. And if you have a relatively new sales force or people that don't understand the concept of conceptual solution selling, that's a pretty good way to go about introducing it to them.
Okay, Spin Selling by Neil Rackham.
Yeah.
All right. So what music's on your playlist these days?
I have 2 kids, right? So I don't have any real access to my playlist, right? So they have access to that.
What are they making you listen to these days?
No, they make me listen to Justin Bieber, and they make me listen to Adele. That's
there are worse things in the world.
There are. I'm kind of a history buff, as you mentioned. You had a history degree. I'm into Audible books, right? So I'm part of the Audible subscription, and I listen to a book a month. I'm part of the Book a Month Club, and I like a lot of history books. And so there's a great courses series that are out that take these great professors from Cambridge and Emory and Oxford and Harvard, and give you a brief snippet into some of their courses. So I'm really into that right now.
Oh, excellent. That sounds fun. I'll check that out.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, Scott, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Again, you mentioned, RampedUp.io. That's the company. I tell people that IO stands for intelligent onboarding, although that's not necessarily the derivative. It sticks a little bit better. So check us out if you want to hear more about us.
All right. So that's RampedUp.io. Scott Miller, founder and CEO. Thanks again, Scott, for being on the show.
Thanks, Andy.
And remember, friends, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And an easy way to do that is to make this podcast Accelerate a part of your daily routine, whether you listen on your commute, in the gym, or as part of your morning sales meeting. That way you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts, and like my guest today, Scott Miller, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.